Hey, it's Amir and this is the Daily 10 segment of the Talent Tango podcast. I'm here with Arash.
Hello.
So today we want to talk about telling your story, right? I mean, I think everything that we do these days, if you go on LinkedIn, everyone's a storyteller. Like everyone is the
Or
guide. So
trying to be.
we're trying to be, but obviously, there's a lot of books out there about, how Hollywood frames movies, and there's always a guide that helps the hero overcome the struggle. And I think what's interesting is we always are talking to candidates and telling them, look, we need to provide a narrative to your background, the context, and even internally, like, in the last couple of weeks, we've been, sitting down talking about the narrative of the company and the image of the company, the brand. And sometimes what's interesting is is in your mind about who you are, what you stand for, and then what you actually produce on the output are two different things, because for some reason you feel like it needs to sound differently. It needs to be articulated differently, whereas it needs to be articulated in the fashion that it needs to be articulated, who you are, what you stand for. And again, a lot of candidates, when you're talking to them, you're trying to get that detail of, hey, you know, I understand you've been working with this, but I need to put that in the context. I need to provide the narrative. Otherwise, the hiring manager's never spoken to you. And there's a gap between that piece of paper, the resume that they're viewing, the story that it's telling, and then any type of commentary that we have on top.
Yeah, I mean, I think, words do a great job of storytelling, but being able to explain the why. I think without people even realizing, you're always innately curious to the why. So I think if there's a gap, the assumptions are made, and typically those assumptions are not to your best benefit. So I think what we're always trying to do is make sure that we're painting a picture accurately, right? Of this individual for this specific job or whatever the case is. And again, a resume, 1 page, 2 page, 3 pages. I mean, it can only tell so much about who the actual person is that you're submitting to a job. And again, all these decisions, especially when you're talking about recruiting, you're looking at a resume 10 seconds, 20 seconds max, right? If it's better, you start looking at it more in detail. So being able to add some color that's actually relevant to what conversation you had with the person, and that's the gap, right? Like you actually had a physical conversation with somebody versus I'm just getting a resume. So what else can you add to the story of the resume? Because the resume can only get you, 65, 70% of the way. If you can fill in a little bit of that gap to get closer to 100 before a hiring manager actually reviews the resume, then I think you only put yourself in the best position.
Yeah, and I think that, when it comes to the commentary on top of resume, which is, really rounding out the person's profile, the persona. I think sometimes actually calling out the 800-pound gorilla in the room, the thing that's missing, the thing that's obviously an issue that might be the obstacle. Getting that out of the way up front basically
Agreed.
means you validate the candidacy easier. But I think even when it comes to candidates and they're always, hey, do you think my resume is good? I think sometimes it's, you know, they're trying to produce a document that tells a story a certain way, and unfortunately the reader is going to interpret a different way, and those gaps need to be filled in. And sometimes obviously we don't quite, always know the functional role the person is doing to their level. We never do, but we need to be able to articulate to the person who does, so that you can bridge that gap. And I think that becomes a supreme important part of the job.
Yeah, I think what can help to bridge that gap, I think I mentioned this the other day, is maybe knowing a couple questions that the hiring manager wants to know, like specifically with XYZ, right? And then it's like, hey, hiring manager, if they don't have this specific experience, is that a complete deal breaker? If the answer is yes, then that helps you on the front end. If the answer is no, then what kind of areas are acceptable, right? So when you are speaking to a candidate, you're able to fill in the gaps because you know what the person that's going to be doing the hiring is looking for, right? And then also on the flip side, I don't think any candidate you deal with is really looking to put themselves in a position to be unsuccessful, right? So they wanna know whether they can fill in the gaps of what you don't know, right? And obviously, that's why we're trying to help facilitate a conversation between the candidate and the hiring manager ultimately, but I think on the front side, being able to kind of put in some of those missing pieces to at least give a little bit more color and a little bit more light to who this person is, and also I think in how their personality is too, right? if you can garner a couple things and fill in the gap. And I think a point that Amir made that's really important is definitely addressing something that they might not have that maybe your manager really, really wants. But again, they might have 9 out of 10 and they might not have one. And really, overall, it's the package that you're delivering that needs to be kind of as complete as possible.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting to that is I think as candidates, they can go work on their personal brand. They can create a blog, they can go do XYZ's different repositories depending on what your background is to add more context to what you do, whether it's GitHub as an engineer, there's tons of different, artistic UI UX oriented dribble, that type of thing. So I think it just depends, and that gives you even a better, and that's good for your personal brand, gives context to the actual physical
Sure.
resume. I think on the flip side, sometimes you wish that hiring teams had similar ability to represent not just that everyone's focused on employer brand, represent the brand, but also represent the job and the actual realities of the job, not just, hey, I need these 15 things, and also can you lift 50 pounds. It's fantastic that's there, but I think when it comes to, again, you then we get on the phone, or internal recruiters are doing this, it's trying to explain the job that you've taken from somebody else. And I think sometimes, again, what I've found is very interesting is what's in our minds and what gets translated necessarily isn't high fidelity. And that's where some of the issue is, because what's in my mind, again, talking about, our company even, we know what our values are, what we want to stand for. But when we look at the site, we look at what it's showing right now, we're not super happy. We want to change it. And we're actually trying to go back and saying, hey, it might sound like a little rougher on the edges, but this is how we want it to sound. That's what's trapped in my mind. And I think that IP that's stuck in our head sometimes doesn't make it out, and that makes it difficult to bridge. And I think both candidates and hiring managers getting some of that IP out gives context and the nuances that are missing on the regular stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think always something is to be said for lost in translation, right? So I think ultimately that would
Confusing movie, by the way.
I
I'm
haven't
dating
seen
I'm
it.
dating myself, but it was Bill Murray confused the heck out of me, though.
Still haven't seen that. A big Bill Murray fan though, but I think when you're looking at hiring teams, however big the team is, if it's a team of one, team of 10, team of 20, there's obviously a lot of different components that go into um, their specific jobs and their responsibilities to the company, right? So I think when you're trying to fit in this specific person to come in, I think the more you can get from the team, right? The better you can paint a picture. And then that way, you're helping this other person that's trying to ultimately help their personal brand by taking your job, right? It's yes, the company's gonna receive a product, right? They're gonna get the byproduct that this person skill set, but that individual too is building up their brand by learning more skill sets, by having a better, company on their resume or whatever the case is. So I think it's recognizing that the person that you want to come join your company has a brand that they're trying to build for themselves. So it's like brands on brands trying to come together. And that's what we're obviously trying to marry. And how can we help bridge that gap when we don't always are, and we're not always able to articulate everything that can come with this position, right?
Yeah, and this is one of the few, this is a job where you're again you're not an expert at you're not a practitioner, right? So you're not a practitioner, so there needs to be context, there needs to be a grasp of the functional nature of the role to an extent. And that's where you become that middle pivot. And I always talk about, we're never going to be the doers of the job, but if we can actually understand functionally a deeper level, then that little pivot that we're talking about of what IP, what brand, what values you have in your mind that are trapped, that's easier to disseminate and get out because you can articulate it. And I think everyone, at this point, there's so many platforms to help round that out, especially if you're a candidate. You could do, if you're an engineer, put stuff on GitHub that showcases some of the context that somebody couldn't see on a resume. And I think there's so many different avenues to do that now.
Yeah. I mean, you just got to pick, I think, what works for you and how comfortable you are to showcase those skills you have. And also what medium kind of the audience that you want views and kind of then be able to put out the right content based on kind of who you are and what you want people to know about who you are.
Absolutely. Okay. So I think that's it for today. Let us know what you think. I think, personal brands become a big thing. Everyone wants to be the guide on LinkedIn, but more importantly, how do you get that IP, what you know, what you wanna represent as your brand out into the public without distorting it? That's always the challenge.
Definitely.
Till next time, leave us a
Bye-bye.
review. Thanks.